Hello and welcome to the Infinite Text. My name is Patrick, and today we're going to talk about player agency, what it is not, and how it can impact your campaign. In the comments of my last video about old school Renaissance versus modern D&D, I got the request to talk more in detail about the categories I was broadly talking about in that video. So I decided to do that. And this video will be more of a free talking video, not like a comparison between two things or a list or pros and cons or something like that. I will just try and talk what I think what player agency is and how it can impact or change your campaign. So first up, player agency doesn't mean that the players can change the rules or become the referees of your campaign. Sure, in a session 0 you can agree on house rules, and that's fine, I'm doing that too, but as soon as they are set, you should adhere to them. And if you don't have a rule for a situation that comes up, then you can talk to your players and ask them, what do you think would be a process to manage the situation or to get out of the situation or to make adjudicate a rule. And if this is then established, then you can take that up into the house rules and you are set for next time when that comes up. So what is player agency? Well, I think there are two perspectives to that. From the player's perspective, it is how much their decisions shape the narrative. And from the GM's perspective, it is how much the GM is prepared to give away control over the narrative. Because I think that is really what it is. It is allowing the players to shape the narrative based on the decisions that their characters make, the ideas they have, the plans for the future of their characters they have. And this in turn then leads to somewhat of a loss of control over the narrative by the GM. Because you are allowing your players to say, we help the goblins in the forest against the vampires in that cave in the forest, because the vampires are a bigger threat than the goblins. And maybe this leads to vampire goblins because they find something in that cave that turns them to goblins, vampires. So maybe then they become an army and they attack the nearest city. And maybe through the deeds of the party, they can become dukes or counts within the region they are in. Now, is that a bad thing? No, absolutely not. This can actually be a great thing. It's just harder to implement in certain scenarios than in others. For example, in a railroady module like Lost Mines of Endelver, there is almost no space for real player agency because you have the story you should follow, because if you don't follow it, then the bad guy wins. And maybe the world ends, whatever happens in the module you play. And in a sandbox campaign, it's a lot easier to implement because sandbox campaigns are made for that. They're made for player agency, for freedom, for choice, for impact through these choices. It all depends on what you're playing and what your players like, because some players don't even like to have this freedom. They stand there and they don't know what to do because there is no path for them to follow. So what if a player comes to you and says, I want to be the king? Well, that's a fun idea, but that's not how it goes. Because first, that's boring. Second, world level changing events don't just happen overnight. And third, kings usually inherit that from their father, or they are heroes who did great deeds and then become the king, if that's even possible in the monarchy you're living in. Or third, it's taken by force, tyrants and stuff like that. So what I would answer is, yes, but how do they become the king? Because this sparks then their imagination. You hear the gears work, and they come back to you with a plan how their characters become the king. And over a few iterations, you develop a narrative of that, a couple of stages that they have to achieve. Because just because you're playing a sandbox, let's just assume you're playing a sandbox. And just because of that doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything. Yeah, you still have to make a couple of points. How can they become the king? What can happen? And probably if this happens, if they come to you after the third session and say that, then you might not even know how that is possible. Maybe there isn't even a king. Maybe it's a tribal society and the king wouldn't be accepted anyway. So this needs some time, and over time you get this plan for the PC, for the player character, and that's awesome because it takes a lot of work off of you and gives the player the feeling that they live in this world, that it's their world, they can make decisions, and if they then eventually become the king, well, that will be something they probably tell in 20 years. I played this D&D session, and I had a GM, and after 20, 30, 50 sessions, my character was the king, and the other players in my group, they became dukes, and then we had huge battles, led armies into combat against the forces of chaos, stuff like that. This can be really awesome. So what happens if next day the second player comes and says, but I want to be the king too? It's not easy to align the character goals and their storylines and what they want to do in one party. Actually, it can be very difficult. In my experience, mostly within the first 10, 15 sessions when this all starts to take shape, they will align more or less like organically and find out what they want to do. And sometimes they don't even have ideas at the beginning what their characters want to do. You know, they just want to play, they want to go out, they want to kill some orcs and get some treasure and buy some magic items or find some magic items, maybe make some, whatever, make new spells. So at the beginning, it might not even be in their heads that they have goals, but at some point, this will start to manifest, and you can also kind of push them in the idea by asking them what they think their characters want to achieve during their careers, and so on. So if that doesn't happen, if they just can't decide what they want to do, there are 5 players and they have 6 goals and they don't want to make a decision, they can't decide, then a wonderful way to resolve this is to do one-to-one sessions and follow the personal story arcs with each player alone. I've done this several times. It's a lot of fun, but it's also more effort for you, and you have to, if you didn't already, introduce time tracking. You have to really keep track of time to don't run into contradictions and anomalies. A player can only be in one place, and if the party is in that town and one player is in that town because they are following a personal goal and it's 5 days of travel, and they decide to go into a dungeon, then he or she can't follow. That's just how it goes. And if that doesn't work for you, there are several ways to still get this like somewhat organized. Maybe you can help them find common ground. Maybe several people want to help the downtrodden and want to end the reign of the tyrannical ruler of this and that land. Or maybe there's a cleric who wants to revive the church of his deity, and then there's a paladin who wants to institute an order which follows exactly that deity, so they have like the common ground. You can have them vote on which personal character they want to follow. Like each character, each player has one vote. They say what they want to do, and maybe that helps. Or maybe you can hide their personal stories behind story threads and don't even tell them which one leads to which. You know, if they pick the goblin story, they start player B's storyline. If they pick the rescue the princess story, maybe they start player D's storyline. Stuff like that. So obviously, and I've said that before already, the stuff that I've been talking about in this episode is more directed towards the sandbox campaign. But in a railroady adventure module, there can still be some player agency, though it is hard to implement because, as I already said, there isn't much space for that. But there are certain things you can do. You can make combat very interesting, and you can also make combat more varied by introducing like interactive encounters where there is loads of like interactive environmental things to control, maybe loads of different locations where you have combat, sewers, dungeons, cottages, whatever. You can let them choose in which way to tackle like an obstacle. Just make sure that the outcome is the one that is within the story that the adventure module is following. You can continue the campaign after the adventure is done, and then maybe go into a more open-ended version of the game, into a sandbox style of game, where they then can start. You know, they got some initial fame for doing this adventure, and then they start doing their own stuff. They decide to become this, become that, do this. Loads of sandbox campaigns are actually built like this. You take pre-built adventures, and then you just like give the player rumors which lead to these adventure modules. That can be brilliant too. And I've seen loads of GMs doing that. So I started this video with talking about these world-spanning events like becoming a king. But obviously, player agency starts at the bottom and leads to the top, meaning that early on in your campaign, you should give players enough agency to make them feel that their decisions matter and that they can impact the narrative. And over time, they will become really invested into the world. They will feel like it's their own. And if you want to say it in like somewhat poetic terms, then they will start living in your world and feel as if it is their own, as if they actually live there with their characters. They will immerse themselves and it will be their own, because your job as a GM will shift from preparation to reacting to the decisions of the players and building new narratives and new adventures out of them. You could see it as if the players' ideas and decisions are cobblestones, and the GM paves the way for the players using these cobblestones to build their path to glory and fame in the future. So for now, I think I have said everything I actually wanted to say about player agency. I could go on for another hour talking about examples and ideas and ways to implement it and ways to make sure it doesn't go wrong. But what I really wanted to say in this video, or what I really wanted to convey in this video, is what I think player agency is, what it is not, and how it impacts your campaign. So thank you for watching, as usual. The responses to my last videos were great, so thank you. And if you liked this video, then subscribe to the channel and click the like button, thumbs up. And I'd say see you next time at the Infinite X. Bye bye.